This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Starting today's show is K-State Alumni Excellence Award recipient Kanayo Nwanze. He discusses his past work and his most recent book, A Bucket of Water. Kanayo Nwanze continues the show by sharing what he is excited for in the agriculture industry as it moves forward. We are then joined by Ron Wilson with the Kansas profile on Flickner Innovation Farm. Completing today's show is K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk as he discusses the practice of breeding dairy cows to beef semen and how this practice is being used on dairy farms across the U.S. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show now with 2022 Alumni Excellence Award winner from K-State's Alumni Association, Dr. Kanayo Nwanze. Kanayo, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Kanayo, before we hop into some cool work you've done around the world, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, well, I'm a K-Stater. Did my graduate studies in Department of Entomology, 72 to 75. And so it's like about 50 years ago. I was back here in 2009 to the Department of Entomology. But between 2009 and 2023, there's a lot of transformation that's taken place at K-State. Meeting some old faces, not too many. So on this time around, I'm here with my family, my wife Juliana, and three of my kids, or three of my children, and my nephew. It's really emotional to be back in Manhattan, to be back at Kansas State on campus.
And you've had quite a fulfilled career, it sounds like, and doing a lot of different things. And one of them is writing a book titled A Bucket of Water, Reflections on Sustainable Rural Development. And what do you mean by A Bucket of Water? Well,
that book actually is a collection of speeches and essays that I wrote or I gave while I was at IFAD, International Fund for Agricultural Development. And my 10 years at IFAD basically were the most exciting in terms of my career and my profession, because it gave me the opportunity of traveling across the world, Africa, Asia, Latin America, Middle East, and you name it, and Eastern Europe as well. Gave me insights into how real human beings in rural areas, cope, and their livelihoods and their social settings and everything. And it actually helped me to understand the connection between ag research and development and rural development as well. So basically it's a reflection. The book contains my reflections on rural development. And why a bucket of water? In my hometown where I grew up, little town, well, no longer a little town, it's a state capital now, Asaba, we have a saying that life will always give you what you deserve. Nothing more, nothing less. That if you go to fetch water in a stream, because Asaba is right at the edge of the river Niger. So we grew up, going to the stream to fetch water, and the stream is always running. And the water that you collect at any time you go to the stream is your water. The moment you dip your bucket into the stream, you collect your water. Nobody else can say, oh, that's my water, give it to me, because it's always flowing. So life is like a stream. But you have to walk to the stream, and you have to walk with your own bucket. And you have to bend down, dip your bucket to collect the water. So it's your decision. It's almost like saying that we all have our destinies, and whatever comes your way, you are responsible for it. With that kind of a principle, you begin to understand that the laws in creation are perfect. The laws of nature are perfect. There's nothing like happenstance. There's nothing like coincidence. There's nothing like chance. Everyone must walk down that stream with their own bucket, bend down, and dip your bucket into the water. But the big lesson I learned in my 10 years, my whole career of about 40 years plus, is when you get your bucket of water, be sure you share it with others in your community.
And Kanayo, you've done a lot of traveling, as you mentioned, and so from that work and your bucket of water, what have been some of the most impactful experiences you've had?
Oh, really? It's visiting projects that are supported by IFAD, rural communities, whether it's China, India, Pakistan, or whether it's Kenya, Ethiopia, Nigeria, or Burundi, or South Africa for that matter, or Azerbaijan, you realize that rural populations in these developing countries basically are not just stretching out their hands for charity. They basically are looking for economic opportunities in whatever they do, whether they are farmers, whether they are little businesses, entrepreneurs, and they're looking for economic opportunities. They're not waiting for handouts. And so when you really want to get into development, you must understand the social setting. You must understand what these people want. Because change is not something you can bring about in somebody's life. They must change themselves. So we have tools, and the tools can either be finance, financial assistance, or some social assistance, or some development assistance to help them get what they want. And sitting with them in their homes, and drinking tea or their local brew, or walking through their farms, or their animals with them. Basically, these are the best human beings you can ever come across. So development is not something that you do for people. Development is what people do for themselves. Our role is to support and help them.
And Kanayo, part of that support and help, that's something you're doing is a youth foundation.
Yeah, that's why when I retired from IFAD in 2017, 2018, I incorporated a youth foundation, which is called Facility for Youth Development. In short, it turns out to be Fire Day, which is a Nigerian language, it's a Nigerian word, bringing joy to people. So Fire Day exists as a small financial grant-given institution where we provide grants, not necessarily given the money. We help our grantees to identify their priority requests. It could be a sewing machine it could be a hairdressing equipment. It could be a small generator for electricity. It could be farmers, youth farmers who need some fertilizer or who need a sprayer. So we procure the equipment. When we give them a grant, whatever money, but these grants are in the neighborhood of $100 to $500. It's not millions. It only takes a little bit of money, goodwill, and support. And we procure the item and then give them the item, but not the money, because usually these rural communities, when $500 in a rural community in somebody's hands is a lot of money, I can assure you. Then they have other demands. So we make sure we narrow down their list to that which is most important, which they cannot afford for the moment, and we procure and deliver. Sometimes we do it in phases, phase 1 or phase 2. For instance, a woman who runs a roadside cafe did not have a generator, and she had a kind of a temporary shed, and we helped her procure a generator, procured plastic tables and chairs, and built a little shed for her. It came to about $600 at the end. Her business thrives. Now she can stay open till midnight because she has electricity.
That's a very cool story, Kanayo. And as you have collected, I'm sure, a lot of stories in your lifetime and in your career, part of that lifetime and career, you've been on 3 different continents. And so how have some of those stories and those communities had similarities but also differences? The interesting thing about all of this is that humanity is one and the same. Their needs are our needs. They want a new television, for example, so their children can watch soccer. Or they want a little generator so that they can have electricity and the children can go to school. Why not go to university eventually? And like I said, they're the best human beings. And when you go across the world and these rural communities, you find the best human beings. They want to share their meal with you. It could be something that you would not even think of, no matter how small it is. They want you to come into their homes, and it brings a lot of change. And you find that they are all looking for something better in their lives, just like you and I. And the things we take for granted, for example, And so you find that the human nature is one and the same. It expresses itself based on the environment, but at the end of it, we all have the same needs, the same aspirations. The dimensions may be different, but they have the kindest of hearts, And this it doesn't matter what part of the world you are in. Cities are different.
And that's the interesting thing about it. Cities are totally different. And the cities are no longer about... I'm a little bit biased, but human nature expresses itself so differently between cities and rural communities. And yet, the rural community is what feeds the cities. In the developing world, 70 to 80% of the food that is consumed is produced in the rural space. Rural communities, small farmers and livestock herders, and you name it. And so this is very common, and this is the exciting thing about the work I was doing. But frankly speaking, when you come down to it, what I got from K-State was not just a PhD. Well, it says PhD in entomology, but it's a doctor of philosophy. And basically what it did was that it built my capacity to be able to identify a problem. First of all, to recognize a problem, identify it, and develop a solution and apply it, no matter what field of study. And that's what K-State gave to me, this foundational pillar of an investigative spirit and wanting to bring about change. And that was necessary, and that I got from K-State. So it's quite an emotional attachment to the institution.
That was 2022 Alumni Excellence Award recipient from K-State's Alumni Association, Dr. Kanayo Nwanze. We're going to be cutting to a short break momentarily. However, when we come back, we'll once again be joined by Kanayo as we continue our conversation, and he discusses what he's excited for the future of agriculture. And please remember, as always, that if you're reaching your destination and don't want to miss out on the rest of today's show, or have missed previous shows you'd like to catch up on, you can find them on agtoday.net. We're now cutting to that short break, but we'll be back with Kanayo. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we continue our show with Dr. Kanayo Nwanze. Kanayo, as you've been back on campus, what are a few improvements that you've been happy to see?
Well, what I've seen so far was the Innovation Lab, and it's incredible. I don't think it existed even when I came here in 2009. But the Innovation Lab, we just did a tour. We had a little coffee and cake there, and we did a tour, and it's amazing what is possible there. And it's amazing to see how the old and the new work side by side. You had this little, can't remember the name now, where I had sewing machines and little things, people can come and do there. Then you had the artificial intelligence lab, kind of open space, side by side. And I'm hopefully walking through campus later this morning. I've yet to identify Waters Hall, where I had my office. I'm looking forward to that. But it's amazing that, people say Manhattan hasn't grown, but K-State has grown. And, of course, Manhattan is K-State. K-State is Manhattan. It's really excited to see some of the changes that have taken place.
Kanayo, as you think about people in agriculture and rural communities around the world, is there anything you'd like to tell them?
They make the world. In spite of all the conflicts that are, across continents, in spite of all the disasters, wars, man-made disasters, natural disasters, floods and fires and everything, food is the centrality of mankind. No matter how much technology develops to help us produce better foods, technology, whether it's biotechnology or whatever it is only a tool. At the end of it, nature is the major is the sole provider of food. What we do as farmers is basically to nurture, and that role, from time immemorial, is going to remain the most important. So farmers, they may not have the degrees and education that we have, but without them, we will not make it. And so it's important that, and this is what I say to youth back in Nigeria, or across the world. Farming is a business. Agriculture is a business. And it's not just something that is done by just rural people, scraping the soil. It's a business. It's an economic business. But more than that, it's a multi-sectoral activity. Not only do farmers produce food, not only does agriculture feed people, it creates jobs. It generates wealth. It brings about social cohesion in communities. When children are well fed, they do better at school. When children are well fed, they can build their natural resistance to disease. So you have communities that thrive because agriculture is the basis of their livelihoods. And when agriculture is successful, they are successful. And without farmers and without agriculture, mankind cannot survive. But when you see communities that go from 1 meal a day to 2 meals a day, 2 meals a day, because their agricultural business is thriving, then you begin to understand the importance of agriculture. From feeding humanity to creating social cohesion and bringing about unity amongst people, other things begin to thrive. And I think if we see agriculture as so as I said, as the centrality of human life, we'll respect farmers more than we do.
Agriculture, rural development, research, all important things to you. So as you look forward into the future, what makes you excited?
Well, it's actually almost like a dichotomy, you see, because while I'm excited that young people, at least in the developing world, the young population are beginning to go into agriculture because they see the business opportunities it has. I'm chairman of a small agricultural company called AgroRights in Nigeria. Apart from working with farmers, they're now going into so many things, food delivery, product delivery, and so on and so forth, and even coaching and mentoring youth. I see that as exciting, but at the same time, I see the excitement is that these young people are better equipped with technologies. IT, you can imagine IT in agriculture, IT for development, the huge opportunities that exist. So I see that future there. But at the same time, I see a lot of hopelessness amongst people, because it seems as if there's a deluge of events, wars and crises and political instability, you name it. And of course, natural disasters. And so there's this degree of hopelessness. And while the potential is there, for instance, like in Africa, it's a multiple crises, so you begin to ask yourself questions, And so that's why I say it's kind of a melange of things. But I think that somebody says to me, listen, unless a fruit falls from a tree and rots, it can never grow into a tree. So when you look at it, say, okay, maybe we're going through a phase where that which is rotten must fall off for a seed to be able to germinate. So in that context, there's hope.
Kanayo, if people would like to learn more information about your youth foundation, how can they do that?
www.fayode.com.
That was 2022 Alumni Excellence Award recipient from K-State's Alumni Association, Dr. Kanayo Nwanze. I will put the links that he mentioned in today's show notes, which you can find on acttoday.net. Also in the show notes will be articles done on Kanayo if you'd like to read more information. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined with Ron Wilson for a Kansas profile on Flickner Innovation Farm.
This is Kansas Profile. I'm Ron Wilson, director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development at Kansas State University. The scientists from NASA are studying the landscape closely, but they aren't viewing a satellite image of the moon. This is a group of NASA Earth scientists who are visiting a Kansas farm in person so as to better understand the challenges facing farmers and water resources. The farm they are visiting is a leader in conservation practices. It's today's Kansas Profile. Ray Flickner is the Kansas agriculturalist who met with the NASA scientists on his farm. He is the fifth generation to farm his family's land. The Flickner's base operation is an irrigated row crop operation that has been in his family since 1874. Flickner grew up at Mound Ridge and studied agricultural education at K-State before earning his master's degree. He met and married Susan, who also earned bachelor's and master's degrees in education from K-State. She became a family life and resource management teacher and served as executive director of the Kansas Association of Family and Consumer Sciences. Flickner taught college agriculture classes before pursuing a career in agricultural lending. He described education and finance as the first two phases of his life. In 2007, a couple of years after my father passed away, I made the decision to enter the third phase of my life and began tending the land full-time, Flickner said. The current operation produces irrigated corn, soybeans, sorghum, and wheat. Through it all, an important theme has been the importance of conservation. Conservation and sustainability has been, still is, and always will be the key ingredient to keep farms and ranches thriving, Flickner said. This includes economic sustainability. As the late, great Dr. Barry Flintsbaugh was famous for saying, without profitability, a farm will not be sustainable, Flickner said. Conservation and water quality have long been priorities for the Flickner family. Ray's grandfather planted shelter belts and windbreaks in the 1930s. Ray's father transitioned crop ground to minimum tillage in the 1980s. Ray installed the first subsurface drip irrigation system on the farm in 2001 and has expanded that system significantly since. The Flickners have constructed miles of terraces, built acres of grassed waterways, enhanced efficiency of their irrigation systems, enabling their water use to be 40% less than the county irrigation average, and transitioned to a fully no-till or minimum tillage operation with cover crops playing an integral role in soil health and soil biology improvements. They have grid soil sampled nearly 1,000 acres on a 4-year rotation, enabling them to variably apply nutrients and improve organic matter in the soil. In 2019, the Flickner Innovation Farm was created as a site where various water conservation initiatives, soil health practices, and weed management tools are tested on a production-scale farming operation. This is now a collaboration of more than a dozen university, industry, and agency partners. It's located west of the rural community of Mound Ridge, population 1,974 people. Now that's rural. K-State Research and Extension and the Kansas Center for Agricultural Resources and the Environment have been instrumental in truth-testing many of these trials and experiments, Flickner said. The farm hosts summer field days and winter meetings where peer-reviewed research is shared with other producers and partners. Hearing from producers who have taken something they learned from one of our events back home to implement is music to my ears, Flickner said. The Flickners received a Success Story Award at the Kansas Governor's Water Conference, the Kansas Farm Bureau Statewide Natural Resources Award, the Kansas Bankers Association Water Conservation Award, and even testified before Congress. In 2022, earth scientists from NASA visited the Flickner Innovation Farm to learn about the challenges farmers face related to water resources. Susan and I have been blessed with a multi-generational legacy, Flickner said. We've committed ourselves and taught our children, who are in turn teaching our grandchildren, that we must leave the land in a better condition than how we found it, he said. It's time to leave these NASA scientists at the Flickner Farm. We commend Ray and Susan Flickner and family for making a difference with innovation and conservation. They are making these principles work in a way that is truly down to earth. For the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development, this is Ron Wilson with Kansas Profile.
That was director of the Huck Boyd National Institute for Rural Development at Kansas State University, Ron Wilson, and he was sharing a Kansas profile on Flickner Innovation Farm. I will put a link in today's show notes where people are welcome to listen to past and future Kansas profiles. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll have this week's Milk Lines with Mike Brouk as he discusses using beef semen in dairy cattle herds.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's Milk Lines. The practice of breeding dairy cows to beef semen continues to grow within the industry. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk says this breeding practice can also be profitable because it helps reduce the number of replacement heifers that need to be raised. He explores how the practice is being used on dairy farms across the U.S.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning the use of beef semen and creating crossbred calves on your dairies. This is a practice that probably began 20 years ago or so actually, and has continued to grow in popularity, especially in the last 10 years and maybe even more so in the last 5 years. A lot of times we have an excess of heifers on our dairy farms, so as we look at our culling rates, we realize that our heifer herd does not need to be quite as large as it might be at the current time. So one of the ways we can reduce the size of the number of replacement heifers we're raising is to use some beef semen in some of our breedings. This will create crossbred calves. Recently, those calves have been worth a lot more than straight-bred Holsteins. And oftentimes we see a value of maybe 3 to 4 times the value of a straight-bred Holstein when we're looking at utilizing some animals in the production of meat rather than milk. So what are the current trends that are going on in our industry as far as how beef semen is being used on dairies across the United States? Some recent information reported in the Hordes Dairyman gives us some insight based on a research program that looked at some survey data recently. So first off, what are the things that drives a dairyman's decision when he looks at utilizing beef sires in part of the breeding program of his dairy herd? Well, conception rate is important, and calving ease, as well as the cost of semen. So those are top 3 reasons why producers may consider using a beef bull when breeding some of their dairy animals. As we look at how we utilize those beef sires in our herd, heifers receive the least amount of beef semen, usually only about 18% of the breedings on the farms that were surveyed. As you look at first lactation animals, about 41% of the breedings were associated with beef sires, and second and greater lactation about 60%. So there seems to be a trend that we see an increase in the use of beef semen on older animals as opposed to younger animals. There was also some interesting things reported concerning the use of beef semen based on the number of services. In heifers, farmers surveyed usually waited until after 2.9 services before switching to a beef sire. However, when you look at the data for the cows, only about 2.3 services before switching to a beef sire. So it seems as though that in our industry, as probably should be done, heifers should have a higher genetic value than older animals in the herd. It's maybe more important to wait another service or so before you actually switch to beef semen as compared to the older animals in your herd. Now, when you look at the percentage of animals that you need or the percentage of your breedings that you'd like to have from beef sires, that's going to vary greatly by farm, and that's all going to be associated with your culling rate. So make sure that you sit down and carefully calculate how many of these crossbred calves you actually want to create on your dairy, making sure that you're going to have an adequate number of heifers available for replacements in your own herd. Another thing that was noted in this survey was the importance of colostrum to keep these animals healthy. 95% of the farms that were interviewed stated that they do feed colostrum within 6 hours of birth, and that they generally feed about 4 quarts of colostrum on about 70% of those farms. So colostrum feeding, regardless of our breeding program, continues to be a very important part of producing healthy calves, whether they be crossbred beef calves or straight-bred Holstein or other dairy breeds. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.